Diane's Answers, Part 1, 18 years old. They had been 18 years old when they married. This was 1958. He was going into the Air Force in 3 weeks. She was the girl from North Torrance High School who had the quality, which he had noticed before he had words for it, of being exactly the same person in every room she entered. He had grown up moving 16 times, which meant he had grown up learning to perform the appropriate version of himself for each new environment. The shy, quiet kid who kept his head down in the classroom and his concerns to himself. Diane Holchek was not that. She walked into rooms and was Diane Holchek, and the room adjusted to her rather than the other way round. He had not understood, at 18, that this was the most important thing about her. He had understood it by degrees over the 30 years that followed. They married in June. He left for basic training in July. She stayed in Torrance, working at the pharmacy on Hawthorne Boulevard, managing the specific quality of their life that she would continue managing for the next 3 decades. Not because Chuck was absent in the negligent sense, but because he was absent in the physical sense often enough, and in the mental sense frequently enough, that the management of ordinary life fell predominantly to her. She did not complain about this. This was not the restraint of someone who was suppressing complaint. It was the character of someone who made decisions and lived with them without the ongoing audit of whether the decisions had been right. She had married Chuck Norris at 18, with a clear enough understanding of what she was marrying. Someone who would be in the grip of something larger than the immediate domestic environment, whose attention was divided between the person in front of him and the practice that was always running underneath, always pulling him back to the 5 o'clock sessions and the competition calendar and the dojo and the students and, later, the films. Chuck understood this about her. He understood it imperfectly and incompletely, the way you understand things that are present in your life as given conditions rather than as chosen elements. Diane was the given condition. He was the variable. Plain to Chihuahua, Part 2. What 30 years looked like. 30 years was a long time to look back across. He was 38 years old in 1978, which was the year Good Guys Wear Black came out, and the film career became a real and substantial thing rather than an ambitious possibility. Diane was 38 too. They had been born 6 months apart, which meant they had aged through their decades in close proximity. Each decade's particular character shared, even when the content of their individual experience within it differed. What the 30 years from 1958 to 1988 looked like from the outside was a marriage. It produced 2 sons, Mike, born in 1962, and Eric, born in 1964. It produced a shared history, the laundromat dojo, and the sleeping bag, and the 10 losses, and the 6 championship years, and Whelan's death, and the films, and the growing recognition, and the specific texture of a life built by 2 people in close proximity over 3 decades. What the 30 years looked like from closer in was more complicated. The complications were not dramatic. There was no single fracture, no defining crisis, no event that could be pointed to as the moment when things had gone wrong. What there was, instead, was the accumulated texture of 2 people who had each continued to become who they were going to be in the ordinary way of human development, and who had arrived in their late 30s at a place where who they were was not entirely continuous with who the other person needed them to be. Chuck had, over 30 years, become the man the dojo and the championships and the films had built. This was not a bad thing in itself. But the man it had built was increasingly someone who belonged to a category, practitioner, champion, actor, public figure, that had its own claims on his attention and his energy and his presence. And Diane was the person who had always been the ground condition of his life, the thing he returned to, the person who managed what he was absent from. And what she managed after 30 years was a life that he inhabited part-time. This was not the full account of what went wrong. but it was a true part of it. Momtementa Borsda. Party 3. The Tuesday in the Kitchen. He had come home late on a Tuesday in 1976. This was 2 years before the film career became what it became, in the period when he was still holding the acting work alongside the dojo, alongside the federation, alongside the training, and the holding of all of it was producing, in the hours of each day, a specific quality of overextension. Diane was in the kitchen. She was doing the dishes from the dinner he had missed. She had left a plate for him in the oven. She always left a plate. But she was not at the table. She was at the sink with her back to the door, and she registered his arrival without turning around. "Late again," she said. It was not an accusation, it was an observation delivered in the tone of someone who has made the observation so many times that it has ceased to carry emotional charge and has become simply a fact about the world. "I'm sorry," he said. "You don't have to apologize," she said. "It doesn't help." She turned off the water and turned around and looked at him with the full quality of her attention, which was always direct in the way that her whole character was direct. What would help is if it were different, but it's not going to be different. He stood in the kitchen doorway. He was 36 years old, and he had been training at the capacity level his life required since 5 o'clock that morning, and it was now 11:40, and the plate in the oven was the first food he had thought about since lunch. "You could come to the dojo more," he said. "You used to come to the tournaments." "I know," she said, "but that's not the same as being the person you come home to." He looked at her. Diane Holchek Norris was 36 years old, and she had been standing in kitchens like this one for 18 years, managing the life that he came home to from the dojo and the training grounds and the tournaments and now the film sets, and she was telling him something that was accurate. "I don't know how to change that," he said. "I know you don't," she said. "That's what I'm saying." She looked at him, not with anger, which would have been easier, but with the clear-eyed quality she brought to things that were true and needed to be seen clearly. "I married the person you were going to become. I understood that, and I chose it. But choosing it doesn't make it simpler to live." She turned back to the sink and turned the water back on. He got his plate from the oven and ate at the kitchen table while she finished the dishes, and they talked about the boys, their ages, their schools, the ordinary texture of the domestic life she managed. And the conversation was the conversation of two people who understand each other and are not currently able to bridge the gap between understanding and changing, and who have made a kind of peace with the gap. He had thought about that Tuesday for years afterward. Othamantilas Archer. Part 4. The sentence, the one that Diane said that he had never repeated, that had stayed with him through the years and through the changes and through everything that happened after, was not said that Tuesday in the kitchen. It was said in the spring of 1978, on a Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks after Good Guys Wear Black had opened, and the reviews and the box office had confirmed that the film career was real, and that the real film career was going to require more of him than the attempted film career had required. They were in the back garden. Mike and Eric were playing in the corner. Diane was reading on the garden bench, which was where she read on Sunday afternoons when the weather permitted. She had always been a reader, which was one of the things he associated with her most specifically, the quality of her complete absorption in a book, the same total attention she brought to everything she chose to engage with. He came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat next to her, and she closed the book with the bookmark placed, which was another one of her qualities. She always placed the bookmark. She never dog-eared a page. She always respected the object in her hands. He told her about the response to the film, about what his agent had said about the offers that were beginning to come in, about what the next phase of the career was likely to look like, the productions, the location work, the schedule, the specific and increasing claims on his time that a working actor's life made. Diane listened. This was her method. She listened fully before she spoke. She had never been a person who assembled her response while you were still talking. She received what you said, and then she thought, and then she spoke, and what she said was always the product of the full reception, not the half reception that most conversational exchange involved. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm proud of what you've built. I want you to know that clearly, not as a consolation for what I'm going to say next, but as the thing that's true." She paused. "What I'm going to say next is the version of this marriage that we've been living for the last 10 years, where I run the household and you inhabit it when you're available. That version is not going to hold the weight of what's coming, not because I'm not capable, but because I don't want to spend the next 20 years managing a life that you visit." He was quiet. "I've been thinking about this for longer than I've been ready to say it," she said, "and I want to say it now, because I'd rather say it when there's still time to do something about it than later when the distance is larger." He looked at the garden, at the boys in the corner who were in the middle of some private game whose rules were visible only to them, at the fence, with the neighbor's rose bush coming over the top of it in the particular way it did in spring. "What would doing something about it look like?" he said. Diane picked up her coffee cup. "I don't know," she said. "I've thought about it. I don't have an answer that I'm confident in." She paused. "What I'm confident in is the version we've been living is ending one way or another, either because we do something different or because I stop being able to live it." She said it without drama, in the tone of someone delivering accurate information about the world. "I'm telling you this now because I respect you enough to say the true thing rather than the easier thing." He had not repeated this conversation to anyone, not to Ray Medina, who was his closest professional confidant, not to McQueen, who had been his friend, not in any interview or in any version of the public account of his marriage that had circulated since the divorce in 1988. He had kept it because it was private, not private in the sense of something to be ashamed of, but private in the sense of something that belonged to the specific and irreplaceable relationship between two people who had known each other since they were 18. What Diane had said that Sunday afternoon was the truest sentence anyone had ever said to him about his own life. Part 5. What he did and didn't do. He had tried. He was scrupulous about this in his own account, not in the version he told others, but in the account he maintained privately, the honest version without the softening that comes from public presentation. He had tried. He had restructured the schedule, for a period, to be home more. He had taken fewer federation meetings. He had turned down 2 film projects in 1979 that he would have accepted on their merits alone, because accepting them would have required location work that took him out of the house for extended periods. The trying had been real. He knew this with the same quality of honest self-assessment that he had applied over 15 years of competition to his own performance in every match, neither inflating nor deflating, just seeing clearly. But the trying had also been insufficient, in the specific way that trying to change a structural condition by changing the symptoms of the condition is always insufficient. The structure was, he was someone whose deepest engagement was with the practice, and the practice required presence, not just physical presence at the dojo, but the kind of interior presence that the practice demanded of him, that occupied his attention even when he was physically elsewhere. This was not a character flaw, it was the character. And Diane had understood this about him since she was 18 years old and had chosen it with open eyes. But understanding something and living it indefinitely were different things. The distance had not closed, it had narrowed, in the years between 1978 and the eventual end, in the way that genuine effort narrows distances without necessarily closing them. They had remained married. They had continued to be the kind of parents their sons needed. They had continued to function as partners in the management of a shared life. And the gap between them, the specific gap between the person he was primarily and the person he was in their marriage, had remained. Chuck drove home from the dojo the evening after the last tournament he attended before the end of the marriage, a Federation event in November 1987, at which he was an elder statesman rather than a competitor, observing the work he had built, and sat in the car outside the house on the specific block in Torrance that had been his address for 12 years. The lights were on in the kitchen. Diane was probably reading. The boys were grown and out of the house. He sat in the car and thought about the Sunday afternoon in the garden in 1978, and about what Diane had said, and about what the subsequent 9 years had been, and he understood, sitting in the car in the dark outside the house, that what she had been telling him that afternoon was something he had received but not fully heard. Not because he hadn't been listening, because fully hearing something about yourself requires a quality of openness that is difficult to maintain when the self in question is fully occupied with the work it has decided to do. Maintained. Part 6. What the sentence meant. He had kept the sentence for 10 years before he understood what it fully meant. The sentence was, "The version we've been living is ending, one way or another. Either because we do something different or because I stop being able to live it." He had heard it in 1978 as an ultimatum, not an aggressive one. Diane was not an aggressive person, but as the announcement of a condition. He had responded to it as an ultimatum, which meant he had responded to it with the specific quality of someone managing a threat, doing what was necessary to diffuse the immediate pressure without addressing the underlying structure. What the sentence had actually been was an accurate description of the future. She had seen in 1978 what was going to happen, not through prophecy or intuition, but through the specific quality of clear-eyed assessment that was her most consistent characteristic. The same quality she brought to everything, the refusal to manage the perception of a situation at the expense of seeing it accurately. She had seen the structure of the marriage, what it required of her, what it offered her, what it could and could not be given who he was, and she had described what she saw. The description had been accurate. Everything she had said had been true. The version had ended in 1988, and it had ended in the second way she had named, because she had stopped being able to live it. He had not been able to do something different, not because he hadn't tried, because the thing that would have needed to be different was the thing that was most essentially himself, the orientation toward the practice, the calling of the dojo, the specific and permanent quality of being someone whose deepest engagement was with the work. And Diane had always known this about him. She had always been clear-eyed about it. She had chosen it at 18, and she had lived with the choice for 30 years, and at some point the living of it had exceeded what she was willing to continue living. He respected this, not in the way that you respect a decision after the fact, with the softening of hindsight. He respected it in the more specific and more difficult way of recognizing that the decision had been made from the same quality of clear-eyed assessment that had always been her most defining quality, the same quality that had made her the most honest person in his life, the person who had told him the true thing rather than the easier thing, consistently, for 30 years. Maintained. Epilogue. 30 years. The divorce was finalized in 1988. It was not contentious in the way that public divorces often are. Neither of them made it a performance. Neither of them conducted it as a narrative. It was two people who had been together for 30 years and who were no longer going to be together in the same way, managing the transition with the same private competence with which they had managed most things. Chuck saw Diane occasionally in the years that followed, at the boys' milestones, the graduations, the weddings, the grandchildren, the occasions that gathered the people who had been the important ones in shared chapters of a life. She was always Diane at those occasions. The same quality of complete presence, the same directness, the same refusal to perform a version of herself, that was easier than the real one. He had never told anyone about the Sunday afternoon in the garden in 1978, not because the conversation was shameful, but because it was private, and because it belonged to her as much as it belonged to him, and because her privacy in the matter was something he could offer her even after everything else that had not been offered well enough. But he thought about it. He thought about it in the specific way that you think about the sentences that told you accurate things about yourself, with a mixture of gratitude and regret and the particular quality of wishing you had been different. That is not the same as wishing the other person had been different. She had been the most honest voice in 30 years of his life. He had not always been able to hear it. That was the true account. He drove to the dojo on the first morning after the divorce was finalized and taught the 5:30 class and the 8 o'clock and the 10 o'clock. And the structure of the day was the same structure it had always been, and the practice was the same practice, and the room was the same room. Some things change and some things don't. He knew which kind he was.